afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural. My name is Dr. Stacey N.C. Grant, and I welcome you to the show, joined by our legal experts, Edward Machado Esquire and Royce Russell Esquire. We have a packed show. It's August. There's a lot going on, and just appreciate that you take time out of your busy schedules to be here and to be a part of our broadcast every week. Hey, Patrick. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you being here. So, before we get started, hey, Kevin, always great to see you. Thank you for joining in. I'm going to let my co-host say hello, and then we're gonna pay homage to an ancestor that some of you may not know, but important to me. But over to you, Señor Frichado. ¿Cómo está?
Hola, hello everyone. Buenas tardes. Welcome to the show today. I believe you're going to find the information as usual, the information educational as well as fulfilling. I hope you enjoy what we discussed today and learn a lot from it. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Ed, and over to you, Mr. Russell.
I want everybody to get out your pen and paper, ready to write some notes or mark this episode as a comeback episode because the information that we are bringing to the forefront, unless we activate change, the information will always be relevant. And I'm for the button of activating change, and that's why we're bringing up the topic today. To educate and to empower us to say, maybe we can do it a little differently, since we're in the realm of social justice and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. And yes, hello to the other Mr. Russell. Hey, Rich. Thank you for being here, being on the show. So typically, we always highlight when someone transitions, and our ancestors are celebrated. And this one is not a popular one to everyone, but it's important to me. My grand aunt transitioned on Monday. So on the heels of the conference that we were talking about, that's a tribute to my grandmother, we had to bear this news. So that's her right there with the sleep in heavenly peace. That's my grandmother's youngest sister. And my grandmother's birthday was yesterday. So our family is saying, she wanted to go and surprise her sister for a heavenly birthday. My grandmother would have been 104 yesterday. And in the corner, there's my uncle who's still here, 90 years young, and his wife, 89 years young in Jersey. So we had to go and comfort him a little bit because he's the last surviving sibling, so he's taking it difficult process rather with his grieving. But my aunt, she was 89. She was about to be 90, and her name was Yvonne McLilly. So rest in peace to my aunt. Have some strong stock on my maternal side, so I hope some of those genes rub off on me because they've all made it close to 90 and beyond, and my family is pulling together the services and remembering her. So it's a sobering moment, but it's a reminder that life is going to keep lifing. So celebrate each moment. It's a gift. Unwrap it in the present and celebrate it with those that you love. So my co-hosts were like, no, we're going to share. We're going to talk about that. So I appreciate them giving me that space that I can celebrate my grand aunt, Yvonne, as she has made her transition.
And we'll be here when we're 90 doing this show together. You'll be co-hosting, and Ed will be right there, and we'll be giving the information to our community in any which way we can. Now, I'm not saying that we won't be on BET or NBC, but I said we will be here. So we will be present. We will be living. We'll be able to give that information. So let's keep on keeping on, as they say, right?
As
My
they say.
condolences to you and your family.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you, Richard. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. And thank you, Mr. Russell, for both you and Mr. Machado lifting up my family in prayer. So now, as we move on to what's happening in the world and in the news, there's a particular topic that we've touched on before when it comes to, civilian review and what that means and how people get on these sort of review boards. And there's a movement that we'll talk about that's being proposed in New York City Council. But Mr. Russell, we're going to get into what exactly is a civilian complaint review board before we get to the other hot topics today, because it's something that you need to know. And what's being proposed is actually a game changer in how we approach who gets to sit, who gets to review, air quotes, what's happening when there is a complaint. So over to you, Mr. Russell.
Well, I think it's important to have this discussion because most recently I was at Harlem Week and the commissioner was out there, and there was a lot of people from the community, the Harlem community, that was running up to the commissioner and taking pictures with him. And, you know, maybe because I am so jaded, or maybe because I'm better than Al Roker when forecasting the weather, that I was right on point, and that people were running up to this individual because there was a crowd and because other people were taking pictures, not really understanding who he is. Now, I'm not saying that they shouldn't have taken pictures if they understood who he was, but if they did, I wonder if they really would have taken those pictures. And that brought a query to my brain, which followed over and flowed to today, right? Civilian Complaint Review Board. And it's called the Civilian Complaint Review Board because you would think civilians play a major role in deciding what happens or investigating complaints about the police. And at the end of the day, if the people in Harlem understood that the commissioner, no matter what happens with this review board, has the final word to make the determination as to whether someone is sanctioned by way of lost pay, vacation days, fired, brought up on charges, if they understood that, I don't know if they would have been running so fast and so hard to take that picture. So before we really talk about what's on our plate, which is the upcoming new push for what we call the Power Act in New York City Council, I wanted to give us a foundation of what CCRB is, what's the old, and maybe what should be the new. And Ed, at any time you can join in because I know you're familiar with the politics behind it. I'm probably more familiar with actually dealing with them in reference to civil rights cases and so forth and misconduct. But as you know, you share my experience by actually doing some of the work, and you share a different experience by looking at the politics of it.
Well, I just wanted to make sure and clarify for the crowd that you're referring to the commissioner of the NYPD and not necessarily the chair, who's Frederick Davey of the Civilian Complaint Review Board.
Right, and that's why I use the word commissioner versus chair, and I don't even think people even know that there is a chair to the Civilian Complaint Review Board. You know what I mean? And that's why I thought that this was most important, because maybe the person that they should have been taking pictures with and who should have been out in Harlem should have been the chair. If you peep what I'm saying, right? If you can peep what I'm saying, you know what I mean? Thank you for that ground ball layup. You get an assist, and you know what I mean? You know, LeBron James, the Brody is working out pretty good, you know? So I say all that to say this. What is probably most important is the movement, and we'll discuss that. But in order to discuss that, we need to have the foundation. So we have the Civilian Complaint Review Board, affectionately known as CCRB. And the power players are this. It's a 15-member board, right? 5 members are seated and appointed by the mayor. So that's 5 people appointed by the mayor. You have another 5 people that are appointed by the New York City Council. So that's so far 10 appointments. You got 3 that's appointed by the police commissioner. That's 13, y'all. Let's make sure we got the math. We got 1 that is appointed by the public advocate, and then right now that's Jumaane Williams. And I don't think anybody in the community would be upset by him making an appointment. At least for now, I think his record speaks power to the people and people with the power. And then the chair is jointly appointed by the mayor and the city council. So now, when we talk about Civilian Complaint Review Board, you have 5 seats that are appointed by the mayor. Therefore, that goes back to what we talked about. We have to be careful who we put in office, because they're going to appoint people to sit on a board like this. And why is this board important? Once again, it determines the disciplinary actions that will be recommended by this agency for police officers that are bad actors. That is important because that is one of our angst as people of color in America, and in particular New York City. Now, other cities and other states may not have this. They should try to have an agency like this, or there should be some legislation to have some type of body that is similar to the Civilian Complaint Review Board. But five appointees by the mayor, another 5 by city council. Now that gives a little feel of people having power, because you say the New York City Council is electing folks. I don't know, Ed, maybe you can shed light to it. Does the New York City Council really select folks from the community, or is it a rubber stamp of folks that, you know what, you didn't become a judge, but we're going to move you over here and we're going to appoint you to the Civilian Complaint Review Board? I'm a little jaded. I'm not in that space. I know nobody's ringing your doorbell on 100 and whatever street you live on. I'm not going to give out your address, and they're not ringing my doorbell at my location. That's what
I would imagine that it's that kind of process with a lot of bodies such as this one, where members of the city council will propose certain candidates, of course, present them to the city council speaker. And then at that point, once there's some agreement as to these candidates, then they're presented to the entire body. So yeah, I would imagine it's an extremely political process. Those who, are, the manner in which they're probably selected, then filtered through the speaker. And of course, if it's someone that, the mayor or someone like that has any particular objections to, they will make it known to the speaker or members of council their particular dislike for the individual. And, who wants to piss off the mayor? Because, the mayor, as the executive of city government, later on has much influence over what's included in the budget and what's not.
So you mean you can have a great pro day for those who follow sports, right? You can make all the baskets, get all the steals, get all the rebounds. And then somebody who's sitting up in the stands, who's not coaching you, who may not know you directly, i.e. a mayor, let's just say, whispers, and next thing you know, you got your walking papers. You don't get elected.
Well, I mean, listen, this entire process is going to be at some point, quite political. I mean, I don't mean to move in, but I'm sure later on we're gonna talk a little bit about maybe the history and how, civilians weren't always on this board to begin with.
Right. Well, look. I like the fact that there's a name change, but places still stay the same, and we have to be mindful of that. One of the things that is interesting, having worked with or worked in tandem with the Civilian Complaint Review Board, and the reason why I say that is because most important for the work that we do, because if we're filing charges against police for misconduct, excessive force, false arrest, wrongful convictions, any abuse that we see in our community, one of the first things you have to do is file a complaint with the Civilian Complaint Review Board. And the reason why you need to do that, there's some legalese that will save you and automatically preserve your right to move forward legally, but it creates the footprint of the personnel history of that particular officer. So maybe I don't go sue, but I file a complaint. Then down the line, Dr. Grant decides that, she has come in conflict with that same officer and she wants to sue. Well, what's in his history is my prior complaint. And that's why the Civilian Complaint Review Board is important, because it sets the history and the groundwork to say, hey, Commissioner, this is a bad apple and you did nothing about that person. And that person was allowed to repeat the bad acts, known and unknown. And so one of the positive things about the Civilian Complaint Review Board is that it is a database for that type of information. One of the negative things, which we'll talk a little further, is that it's a dog with no teeth. It has no bite. You know what I mean? It just really doesn't have any bite. But as I was saying, I looked in a little bit more as to how they go about who gets what position. So it says, when you look at their website, no law enforcement experience. Like, you can't have law enforcement background. So you think that's great. But then you read 3 lines later and you say, but for the 3 people that the commissioner picks. All right, they got law enforcement background. So the police commissioner is going to pick someone with law enforcement background. So why are you saying no law enforcement background, right? You should just eliminate that. Just say the 3 people that the commissioner picks have law enforcement background. So you have to do a little critical reading here. Now, if you hold office, you can't be on the board. So if you hold any type of public office, you can't. And if you're a public employee, you can't. That excludes a lot of people. I mean, especially when you talk about people of color. People of color in government, city, postal work, any of those positions, you telling you can't even come up. You out of the pocket. And for those who don't know, it's a 3-year term that's renewable in the middle of the night.
In the middle of the night.
It's not like we voting or something. It's in the middle of the night. Like Ed's contract might be up, and then Ed, here go your little slip. You good for another 3 years. Your contract might be up. Oh no, somebody else might slide in. Nobody will know about it.
I'm gonna make some noise. But
I'm saying it's like being a professor that has tenure. Nobody has to know. It just goes on. It goes on. And, I spent approximately 15 minutes talking about this because it's important, because when you look at their responsibilities, so I don't forget, I'll go to my notes, is to complete the investigation of complaints, to make findings as to allegations. Now you have to understand, if there are 2 or more findings in any particular allegation, then the commissioner gets the case, right? They make recommendations to the commissioner as to discipline. They have prosecutory hearings to find someone guilty or not of the misconduct. So I see your head shaking, Dr. Grant. So now you have this hearing, and they can make a prosecutory finding that, Ed, yes, you did use your radio improperly when you hit someone over the head. That you're found guilty. That guilty administrative hearing trial by prosecutors that finding then goes to the commissioner, and the commissioner can say, yeah, well, Ed, yeah, you did hit him over the head with the radio. I'm not going to fire you. I'm not going to suspend you. As a matter of fact, come here. You used the wrong side of the radio. You should have hit him with the other side of the radio. And you keep on going. Or I move you to the property room for a couple of months. Or I transfer you out of that district. So now you're no longer working in the Bronx. Now you're working in Manhattan. So when you say Civilian Complaint Review Board, and you do all this work, and the commissioner has the last say, that's why I say the review board has no bite. And would you really be running it up to the commissioner and hugging them and having pictures if you knew that this is the person that makes a determination as to what happens and what doesn't happen?
And especially the history, right? Because, I mean, the NYPD commissioner has a history of not moving forward in terms of actual, real, substantial discipline against these officers. I mean, we had an officer, Pantaleo, who for months, he drew a salary for years. After, and I do use the word murdering Eric Garner. It was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, especially for anyone who saw that video.
And so what you see coming to fruition is that a lot of work is done to give the guides of social justice and justice, and then at the end of the day is undone. Now,
so before you continue, Mr. Russell, quick question: do these individuals appointed on the Civilian Complaint Review Board get a paycheck?
Yes, they are compensated. They're compensated. Some do it pro bono, but they are compensated for every session that they have to attend. Now, let's talk about the sessions. So you have the Civilian Complaint Review Board that have investigators. Now, it is my experience, and I'm not saying that this is good or bad. The investigators are not necessarily experienced investigators, but are most likely people that graduated college that want to go into this field. Maybe pre-law students that want to become lawyers, people that are thinking about going to law school, and they start off in this agency and then they go to law school, or they come and they start in this agency and this is their first investigative role. That has its good points and that has its bad points. That's for another show, because I've seen some investigators really, really get into what has happened to the client. And I've seen some investigators that, and Ed, you can attest to this, you're like, well, wait a minute, which side are you on? Like the detailness of your question. And that's why sometimes you need to have a lawyer present. Not sometimes, all the time, to kind of gauge, like, wait a minute, what type of report and what type of investigation are you doing? Now, I don't expect you to be totally on my side because you're investigating, but that question that you asked was quite interesting, Mr. A. Quite interesting, right?
Yeah, like you're trying to reach a certain conclusion.
Right. So, Dr. Grant, to your question, after the investigation is done, then the recommendations are presented to the board. So we want Officer Grant fired because he did A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And then the board, those 15 board members, will have to sit there and hold that up there because that's where we're going. We'll have to sit there and make a determination as to whether or not they want to move forward with the investigation's findings. So now let's talk about what the findings are before we move on to the next thing. Findings come in a variety of ways. The one I like the most is substantiated. That means the officer committed misconduct. I like to see that all day. Substantiated. That bodes well for the family that's moving in the area of suing civilly or wants some type of social justice. Then there is unfounded. Now, unfounded it means that the officer didn't commit the act. Kind of, sort of, right? I mean, it does say that, but you have to look at how they got to the conclusion of unfounded. But when most people see unfounded, at least Corporation Counsel, they run to the hilltops like, yes, you know what? The officer did nothing wrong. Then you have this other category called unsubstantiated. Now, what unsubstantiated means is that they're not clear whether or not the officer did something wrong or not. And that could be because maybe the complainant doesn't want to be bothered anymore. Maybe the facts lead itself that it is unclear. Maybe they can't find a complainant. So something in that realm leaves a very gray area. If you're a civilian and you're lodging this complaint, the word and the finding that you don't want to hear is exonerated. That means that they looked at everything, they reviewed both sides, and nothing occurred. We feel like everything is fine. But it goes on. Then you have miscellaneous, and that's where the officer has either resigned, retired, or has been terminated. So you can have an officer do something wrong, CCRB does the investigation, and the guy decides, he wants to become a postal worker, and that's that. It's over, right? And then they have other categories where they call victim was uncooperative. And uncooperative to the naked eye means that they don't want to be bothered. Well, no, that's not necessarily true. Uncooperative could mean that the victim moved, and so they were unresponsive. If you imagine someone who might be homeless or very transient, you may not be able to get them someone that doesn't have the financial stability. They may not be able to pay their phone bills on time, so therefore you lose contact with them. So I don't really like the word uncooperative because it doesn't really mean that. They should just have a category that says unavailable. That would probably shed a little light, because uncooperative means I don't want to have anything to do with you, and that's not really the definition. Sometimes you have calls where the victim is unidentified, don't really say who they are. They want to just file a complaint, and that's fine as long as you have an officer's name and shield, because that still goes on their personal record as an inquiry. And then you have someone who withdraws a complaint. And in most cases, and we have a case like this that's pending now, where the case is pending litigation. And what do we mean by that? Is that there is usually when there is a false arrest or excessive force type of allegation, there is actually an arrest. And so No defense attorney wants their client speaking about the facts of the case while the criminal case is still pending. So what you can do is ask the CCRB to hold off on their investigation until the criminal case is resolved. And that's important because that protects you from any self-incrimination or making any statements that the prosecutor can retrieve to use against you. But my adage is that if you're telling the truth once, you're telling the truth twice, and you're telling the truth 3 times. So 4, 5, 6 times don't make no never mind to me, as long as they still spell the truth.
Well, with that being said, understanding that breakdown, clearly there's some parts of this that I was scratching my head and I don't have on my pearls to clutch them right now. So this city councilwoman decided that something needed to happen because where we're a little unclear, she has raised this. This was March that this hit the news. And I want you to talk a little bit about that now that we know what CCRB is. What's the difference with what our council member Inez Barron is promoting for the Community Power Act?
Boy, the Barons don't stop, do they? They around and around, boy. And for those who are New York friendly, the Barons have always been in politics, and they will stay in politics. And for right or wrong, they're always bringing the community with them. And so sometimes you may not agree with their positioning, but they stay ahead of the curve. And so as far as the movement, it's called the Power Act, and that is police oversight with elected reviewers. Makes sense. Police oversight with elected reviewers. It speaks for itself. Have folks that are elected to this position to review the conduct that is called in question, since we have it called the Civilian Complaint Review Board. I'm going to drop it off on your lap, Ed, in a second, because I don't want to speak too much to the politics, but you know the politics that are played. You hinted to it before. And one of the things that the Power Act suggests is that the elected officials have, or the elected people from the community have the power to actually enact some of the disciplinary actions. It's not overruled by the commissioner. They're asking for a special prosecutor so they don't have to worry about the relationship between the district attorney and police departments, incestuous as one might think it is, or it may actually be. And so I'll let you speak to the politics of it, why this makes sense.
I mean, listen, at the end of the day, with respect to the elected Civilian Complaint Review Board, I mean, if you have members of this board directly elected by the electorate, meaning, in the voting booth, let's say, versus what you have now in terms of that small pool, I believe it's about 5 that get elected by the city council.
Correct.
I would imagine it has pros and cons, right? Because you may, and I'll be honest, I haven't looked directly at the legislation itself, but in certain communities, let's say, are more pro police than others, right? So the question is whether one of their representatives will get on to this board. One, but overall, it seems like a much fairer, response to the review of police misconduct. I mean, police misconduct affects citizens directly. That means citizens should definitely have a say as to what happens, and definitely the whole issue of the police commissioner being able to disregard the recommendations of the board whenever this misconduct is substantiated is a huge issue. I mean, it's like the fox watching the hen house, right? You have the police commissioner who has a vested interest in not upsetting the officers who are under his or her command. And when it comes time to review misconduct, unless it's of a completely egregious nature where other officers would come to a consensus that that person needs to be otherwise disciplined, you have this commissioner basically saying, oh yeah, I know you hit the guy with the radio, or it was substantiated, but I don't think it's that big a deal.
And I want you to continue, but let me just add to your point. In 2017, 62% of CCRB's recommendation was disregarded by the commissioner.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and you
How
also
much?
62%.
Yeah. I mean, it's horrible, the track record. I believe there was also a problem with the police department cooperating with the CCRB in terms of their information requests. So that was, a huge issue right there. There are a host of issues. The problem is that, you have this historical tension between the people and the police in this city going back decades. I mean, decades upon decades. I mean, there was a time when, the police even fought civilians being on in any position to judge their actions because, they don't know our job. How could they, or they're biased, or those who are getting on here have a vested interest in making sure they make findings against us despite the justification for our use of force. And then you have, what you have right now, where you have an issue right now where a lot of people are feeling that, the NYPD is not doing enough to stem crime and violence in the community in order to let things kind of get out of hand so that people, are screaming for them to return to their old ways. I mean, I really hope that, this legislation either gets enacted or some form of it that gets us close to having, board members directly elected by the community. Now, it sounds like they're looking to do it based on the community board, through the community boards throughout the city, Roy?
Yes, it's my understanding. So it's the New York City Council Initiative 2245, and that's what they're looking at. They're looking more community-based because, as you said, the further away you get from the community, the more you can infiltrate your politics just in a different fashion, right? And what's profound about what you said in a very ironic way, right? Everybody has an agenda, elected, appointed, or otherwise. And so you're not getting away from the agenda issue. But if you know people of color, really know people of color, that's why they say if you get a conviction in the Bronx, you really got a conviction in the Bronx, because people of color, they're going to hold your feet to the fire, almost to my dismay, almost to my like, oh my God, like, what are you doing? Kind of deal in reference to, nah, I don't think there was excessive force. I think that this brother or this sister did something. Like, I'm looking at what's going on. We're harder on our own kind, whatever color it is. So that extra piece of jadedness doesn't even work in the police favor. It almost works against the community. I'll take myself as an example. The cases I do voluminous amount of false arrest civil rights cases. And everyone doesn't make the cut because there's something in there that I'm saying, wait a minute, hold up, right? We talk about the three categories. The one is principle, one is injury, one is death, right? And those experiences and hearing what happened and what came out of it, sometimes you have to say, no, I'm not going to do that. So once again, we go back to this fear, right? When we use the word or the phrase or the terminology trademark, defund the police. We go back to that fear, right? We jump straight to, all right, defund the police. All right, everybody put your arms down. Now the community goes to hell. That's not what's going to happen with the elected review board. And that's not what's going to happen with the Power Act. It gives the community more empowerment. It gives the community more transparency. Anybody that's on this board, I've never been to any workshop, seminar, church faith-based seminar or educational program where anybody on these boards say, I sit on the CCRB and this is what we do.
And that there is
nowhere.
Well, that's why we have Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural, so we can break this down, because this is going to be something that will be in the news, and there'll be a lot of focus once the administrations change, because city council and council member Barron is really pushing for this to happen. It's all a part of all of what we're talking about with reform and change and the George Floyd Act. So this is what you need to understand, so you know what it is. I don't think anybody has had that experience, Mr. Russell, on hearing what CCRB does. You hear about it in passing. Now this is giving power back to the community to actually be actively engaged, which is what we talk about here, not just going through life, growing with knowledge. So to be continued.
You know what, Dr. Grant? I'm sorry to interrupt. You know what would have been interesting, right? If we had more of their interaction between the CCRB, more of an elected type of position. One of the mayor candidates was it Mayor Wiley, right? Candidate Wiley. She was, I think, the executive director of the CCRB.
At one point, yes.
At one point. If she was closer to the community at any given time in that position, in the way that we're speaking to in reference to being elected and empowering the people wouldn't be like, huh? Oh, really? Is that her background? Trying to say like, oh, yeah, that's her background. It was like, wow, I didn't know she was that. And I'm in the know and I didn't know she was that.
And that's a great point, because it could have been more of a leverage in a positive way for the outcome. But
right.
Interesting. We're shining the light on it. Definitely. You heard it first on Speaking Legally. So continue to stay tuned, as that is a developing story. It's not over, and there's still more to talk about there. And then we know that we've had a lot of chatter going on about the current governor and what's happening. We spent some time talking about what we saw unfolding, but there was some additional news about some pardons being issued. Senor Pichardo, what say you?
Oh yeah. I mean, I looked at the list and the biographical information that was provided for the individuals that received the pardons and also the commutation of sentences, and they seem to all be legit in terms of individuals who were quite deserving, unlike the pardons and commutations that were issued by the former president of the United States. So this is not a point of criticism there, but what is important to look at is that those the media outlets and the articles that reported on this story also on a pessimistic note wondered whether or not the governor was contemplating issuing himself a pardon to shield himself from prosecution. Because remember, right now, the allegations that came out in the Attorney General's report are now being investigated, I believe, by 3 DA's offices, one in Albany, one in, I believe, either Anianti or Oswego, and one other. And in fact, one of the cases, and I believe the one in Albany, for one of the women was picked up and is being processed by the Albany County Sheriff's Department.
Being processed and being reviewed, right?
Reviewed.
Look, I always jump in when I hear these things, because if you think the CCRB is an exercise in futility, my man with the straw in his hat to the side, he ain't about to do jack against Como. And I predicted it.
Well, I'm not sure.
You spent time.
No. What I found interesting was that it wasn't the City of Albany Police Department, that it was the county, because if the incident occurred possibly in the mansion is within the jurisdiction of the city itself, because you got the city and you got the county, but it's the sheriff's department that's picking it up, which I believe has some sort of concurrent jurisdiction. So I found that interesting, but that's a discussion that's taking place, possibly because I believe there was a law professor who commented that there is nothing in the law that prevents him issuing himself a a pardon. So,
Oh boy.
that's going to be, that's going to be really interesting, especially with what's going on nationwide, because most of the governors throughout the 50 states of the United States are Republicans. And so I read a Politico article, in fact, earlier today, that talks about how, Cuomo, powerful Democratic governor, is now about to step down, which has left the Republicans, full of joy, of course. There's no love lost there. And then you got Gavin Newsom out in California, who's facing recall, based on, mask mandates, etc. Unfortunate, who's also a very powerful, one of the most powerful Democratic governors. And if you kind of look at politics, governors, line up very much closely with state legislatures, then congressional seats. And you're talking about the House of Representatives having a majority, but not as great as Democrats would like. And, same thing in a very slim majority in the U.S. Senate. So, this type of, these types of things entering the discussion is definitely not helpful, especially with right now this criticism that Biden is getting over, what's going on in Afghanistan right now, and people hanging off planes. So, this is not good. It's not good.
I mean, I think overall from the Democratic Party, you're going to have almost any story you can piece together and make it look, horrible. In which I'm not saying that the stories that you mentioned are not. I just think the party has to be resilient and have the fortification to say, yeah, all right, that too, and close the door and keep it moving. Because the Republicans have a way of doing that. Yeah, well, that too, yeah, boom, close the door and keep it going. But as a criminal defense attorney, we always call this thing called a backsplash. And when you have multiple defendants, you always tell your client, look, man, if you go to trial and it's you and it's the kingpin that's going to trial, anything that the kingpin does is going to backsplash onto you, right? And there's a reason why they say that. Somebody jumps in the pool, they splash the water, you get hit, you on the sideline. That's what they call the backsplash, right? So you never really want to get hit with the water from the sideline, especially unknowingly, because it shocks you, it annoys you, it makes you mad. You look at the person in the pool, you're like, yo, look, stop splashing. I mean, all these things come up. It's nothing pleasant about it.
Well, and this story is also in some ways backsplashing or forward splashing, however you call it, with some of the wishy-washiness going on in the assembly and whether or not to release the findings of the Judiciary Committee. First of all, Hastings says that they're going to cease the investigation, no findings, and then there's all this criticism.
That's the point.
And then he says, no, we are going to release the findings.
I was making that point early on. That's the point, right?
So with that point, though, what's the deal? This is just someone asked me, and I'm asking my two legal.
But Dr. Grant,
it's in line.
Before you ask that question, the only reason why I brought it up for another reason, but we're gonna get to your question. I brought it up because you brought up the article. I know his brother's like, God damn, why is my face over there? That's the splash. And then when I bring it culturally, I say, I wonder if Big Rich got into trouble somewhere doing something, and I was on MSNBC or BET, and I gave him some tips of like, hey, bro, don't do this. And the world found out. Could I still be an anchor? All apologies and then some. All the apologies and then some. So the backsplash is forever going to be happening in the other Como's world. It's forever going to be happening. Yeah. And to your point, when you said what's the bottom line answer to this question, that's what I was alluding to very, very early on. That water is splashing, and folks are like, you know what? Let's cut it. We ain't got to do it. He stepped down.
But hold on. So the question that I was asked that I wanted to pose before we got into the backslash was, what's the challenge for the Democrats the question I was posed of why the Democrats don't have a backbone, because they let Republicans get away with, to your point, whatever. We're like, psh, moving on. We're not losing the seat. We're not conceding. We're not stepping down. Just a question before I go on to the next story. Why do we think that we see that disparity in how we act, Democrats versus Republicans that are known to be gangster with it, no matter
You
what?
got to ask your political legal expert, Mr. Ed Pichardo, that
Well,
answer to that question.
I think quite frankly, the main reason why is that, you know, you're answering to and catering to two different types of constituencies. You know, the Democrats are expected to be the more progressive party, the more pluralistic and diverse party that represents diverse interests, you know? And so I don't think that based on their constituency and the people that vote for them, that they would have been in a position to just, you know, say, no, he's staying in office and that's the end of that. And we're going to, you know, ignore these allegations. I don't think they were in a position to do that. They would have paid a very heavy political price versus the other side, right? Who, you know, has a more conservative constituency. Not that they don't care about women, but, you know, their views on some of these things, I believe, are somewhat or very different. In some cases, starkly different. And I think that they would have been more in a position to be able to, I don't know, just say some like really conservative stuff, like some of the stuff that you heard at the beginning of these allegations. Well, why did you wait so long to talk about this? And oh, if it would have been me, you know, I would have, you know, said something right away, like, you know, like, listen, you're, you know, most of the time the people saying this are men, right? So it's like, really, do you understand?
They didn't go through the trauma of what they experienced. So
exactly, or you also had women almost saying the same things. But I think, you know, these are women that if you canvass them on other issues, you will find them to be very conservative in their leanings in some cases. So, you know, I think it's a matter of the constituency. I purely that, I believe.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that just because it keeps coming up. So I wanted to get some insight, and that's like a whole nother show for another day. But there is one last story that we're going to touch on as we watch that unfold. I think what's interesting is that there were so many people in the New York tri-state area, across the country, who looked to him as a leader. Mm-hmm. So I've actually heard people like heartbroken, like they feel like this is like, oh my gosh, how could this happen? I'm like, wait. They're victims. Like, is anybody remembering that there are people that have suffered? And like we said before in the show, we don't want to re-traumatize individuals with what we're doing, but well,
listen, I mean, for years, used to have people in the Black community saying to, I don't know, children saying you shouldn't have been over there anyway. You know, in terms of being, you know, touched by an uncle or somebody. Like,
easy.
You know, like it's like or ignoring, you know, these issues. I mean, you know, it happens.
That's a whole nother powder cake that we would like on this show today. What? So we're gonna press pause and close out with something that's unfortunate. Some might even say slightly comical, but this is serious. Like, you know, with touchless becoming more the norm because of COVID and the fact that we're not out of, you know, dangers with the Delta variant and all these other things that are now coming to bear. A Walmart worker shows how they know when customers steal from self-checkouts. Now, we're mentioning this as a need to know where the legal meets the cultural, because you could be packing your bags and, you know, a situation might happen. We don't want you to have to call our legal experts for something like this. So let's just talk about this story as we wrap up.
I don't know how many people this happened to, but, you know, I mean, Ed'll give his experience, but, you know.
No, I mean, the reason why, you know, this.
Let me just see who's the accuser. Let me see what that color look like. All right, good.
Yeah, I don't think that video pertains to that.
Okay.
I think the reason why this article touched a nerve for me is basically because about a month ago, I was in a situation where I took a relative to the supermarket very late in the day, not realizing that by that time, no cashiers were available, that you were forced to go to self checkout. And as a labor guy, a supporter of American labor, I've always had a serious issue with the elimination of jobs. Okay. These are jobs that your garden variety person who may not have gone to school or is going to school and needs a job, to hold them over. A lot of folks in America rely on these jobs, these cashier jobs, where they ring up these items, they bag these bags, and back in my day, you also had a young man who used to come to the supermarket and say, "Hey, owner, can I pack the bags, for tips?" And that would happen, and people made money all the way around that they could help out other people in the community with. And so here you have these proliferation of these machines called self-checkouts, where you're expected to run the barcode from the item that you're purchasing and then place it in this bag. And, as I'm like, because the shopping cart was full of groceries, I'm like ringing stuff up and hoping it's ringing up correctly. And because some of these items are items that weren't ringing up right away, or you had to punch certain buttons. Like, let's say you bought a certain amount of bananas and the thing only rings up one, and there's about 5 or 6 in the bag, and it asks you, well, how many? And you're like, oh shucks, I don't normally do this. I'm a lawyer. I don't, I'm not a grocery store cashier. And the problem is that type of mistake could lead you to walking to that exit and some big guy with a little whistle saying, "Come here, sir, we need to speak to you. We need you to come into this room so we can talk about what just happened." And you're like standing there like, "What do you mean what just happened? I'm getting ready to go to my car and go home." Well, no, you're not. We think that you may have been stealing or shoplifting, that you may have committed petty larceny. And the problem here is that petty larceny has an intent element to it. Like, the prosecutor has to prove intent, but the question is do you even get there? Because after you go through the embarrassment of trying to explain why you only rang up 3 bananas instead of 5, and whether it was a mistake or not, that amount is probably, once you get to court, the judge is going to, the prosecutor is going to say, well, you know what, we're going to offer you, Mr. Russell, an ACD. And you're standing there like, well, what does that mean? Well, listen, if you take this to trial, the prosecutor, by the time we get there, the prosecutor is going to probably dismiss this anyway. So let's just take the. What do you mean I didn't do anything? This is a problem. Just for the audience, me and my good partner here, Royce, were talking about this a little earlier, and he seems to be more on the conservative side of this.
No. Like, see, there you go. There we go right here.
Like,
let's stop. Let's time out. You don't get to choose the adjectives for me, buddy. That does not work. You are not going to choose those adjectives for me. I'm going to choose my own damn adjectives. Here's the adjective. If Ed walked out of that store and he bought $235 worth of groceries, I'll be damned if they stop him because he got 3 bananas wrong. It ain't gonna work that out. But if Ed leaves that store and he bought some Ben & Jerry's potato chips, and Ben & Jerry's only makes the list, and the potato chips make it in the bag, then we got problems. And that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, I'm jaded. Call me Jada Smith. Call me Jada Kiss. Call me jaded all the way. Just put a J in front of it because I know the dealio. And that's where the culture and the legal meets. I know, as they say, dealio. You know what I mean? Let's make it loud and clear. You understand what I'm saying?
Moral to the story? What's the moral to the story?
Well, the moral to the story is that, just please, audience, be very careful with this. This is a growing phenomenon. I'm starting to see it more and more. In fact, I was at a CVS yesterday and they had one cashier and 3-4 of these machines, operating, and them openly encouraging folks to do the self-checkout. And for me, this is a bigger issue. This is about the elimination of jobs.
Yes, understood.
This is about the shifting of responsibility. Now trying to make you liable for the proper performance of a duty that should go to someone that gets paid to do it.
Well,
right?
Ed, I agree with you, and I don't agree with you, because I tell you one thing. My mama told me a long time ago, when that cashier is ringing up those groceries, you better have your eye on those numbers coming through. Because that's right. So what responsibility? You have the same responsibility. If you're so busy packing that bag down there and them numbers are ringing through, and then at the end, which I hate, as you get through, the woman looks at her receipt or the guy looks at the receipt. Oh, wait a minute. Those tissues were $3 for $1. You charge me $8, and you on that line, you ready to go postal on somebody. You got to catch it as you got to catch it. I'm not saying it's not elimination of jobs, but when you start talking about responsibility, you got it. Like, I count every single penny. I didn't get to where I'm at by not counting the pennies. As a matter of fact, some people on this show owe me some pennies. I'm just saying, you got to do what you got to do.
Well, listen, when I talk about the shifting of responsibilities, I'm talking about you going to that self-checkout doesn't make the price of that item go down.
I know, but you go to that self-checkout and you skip a beat. That's on you.
And that's what I'm talking about, because, okay, that thing if it costs $3.19, whether the cashier rings it up or you ring it up at self-checkout, I don't see no discount there. The price of that item it takes into account overhead and labor costs at that store. I don't see any of that changing with these machines, but yet somebody is losing a job.
That is true.
Somebody's losing a job, and now the onus is on me to make sure I ring that thing up properly.
Well, here's the other part. Some stores are investing in having people be there to help you out in self-checkout, which to me doesn't totally make sense. They can just cash you out. But, it's beware, because we are going into this touchless society. There'll be a whole lot more job elimination. We knew this day was coming with automation and what's happening, but just protect yourself so you don't get in a shoplifting situation, or you're not on camera caught doing something that you innocently didn't see or didn't ring or didn't weigh properly. And the next thing you know, you have security or police coming after you. So we appreciate you sharing this story with us, Senor Pichardo, because one never knows. And even though Mr. Russell has one eye up on some people with how much they're spending inside the grocery store, this is
I'm just saying, every puddle's not a pool. Some puddles are puddles. You know what I mean? You step your foot in, you step your foot out. We are all business owners. We want to be efficient and effective. And I do agree. I do agree with Mr. Pichardo. Job elimination is an issue. But I tell you for sure, you don't punch in that banana. There's one job you're not eliminating, and that's mine right here, is defense counsel. We know that for a fact. So do your due diligence. If you count five, count five. If you count three, raise your hand and have somebody come over and help you.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness, another full show. I can't believe we're at the top of the hour already. Thank you all for tuning in, being a part of Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural, every Wednesday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Continue to share the show, continue to stay engaged. We thank you for showing up. John, Richard, Liz, Patrick, Kevin. We appreciate all of you. If you're watching the replay, just go ahead and put #replay so that we know that you're here and you were able to participate in the dialogue and learn something, which is always the goal. So, gentlemen, any final words? And make sure that you go to their websites if you need legal representation. They are experts for a reason. So, Edward, the law office of edwardpichardo.com, and Royce Russell, ESQ.com. And if you want the copy of Cardiac Arrest, you can go to cardiacarrestbook.net so that you can arm yourself, read something, as he loves to say, before you need something. So final words, gentlemen, before we close out today.
I just want to make sure everybody keep in mind and keep active and follow New York City Council Initiative 22. I think it's 2245, the Power Act. I think that is, police oversight with elected review is something that's important that every county, city, state needs to have. And I want everybody to stay safe, stay well, stay alert, and stay empowered.
And I echo my partner's sentiments. I definitely wish all of you well. Please be safe, and enjoy the rest of the end of this summer. Take care and farewell.
Bye bye, everyone. And hey, Rolanda, see you there.